you should be able to hear us, hopefully.
I turned it down. But you can turn it up just to test. If you want. Yeah, crank it up. You should be able to hear Ben talk then.
Ben's talking.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay, you crank it down. We'll do the normal thing where we go live and go. You remember how to do all this. Yep, here we go. So where do I just got host? So we only have center and right. Okay. Or left. Center and left. Right is yeah. Sorry, down there. Sorry about the craziness.
No problem. It's all good. Camera's like, not my fault, man.
It's
I'm delivering to the cable.
It's not, I think it actually might be the camera's fault. I'm not totally sure. I'd love to not because it's the most expensive part of the system.
I don't think they're that expensive.
No, but they're more expensive than HDMI cables.
That's true.
Consistently.
Yeah.
All right. Are we
Hello,
live?
that's Ben. Are we on?
Wait, what did I just, why is this?
I think you switched the slider. Is it live?
I didn't do the toggle.
No, it's not live. I can
No,
tell.
we're not live. So wait, what? 'Cause
Are you
I've
sure,
always been
Carter?
able to put preview on. Or something is different today.
No, you just changed it. It's supposed to be here, and when you go, you do that, and you're going to change things.
And then I change things, I know, but when I press that, usually I press and then I press this.
But you have to go first, like this. Right now, it's in a quiescent state between
Yeah.
the thing. You can't change this or it'll change that.
I see what
You got to do this, and then you can do the thing you normally do.
Okay, cool. Are we good to go then?
Yep.
I think we're good to go.
And you're in charge of the, you got the music to shut off, right?
Oh, Max, can you just close the slider, please?
There you go.
You want to stream live?
Wait, it's coming from here.
Yeah, yeah, just close the sliding glass door.
No, it's coming from the other room.
Oh. So exciting. No one watches. Doesn't matter. All this is
Three
for
people.
like, yeah, there's like
three people. And it's like two of them are your mothers.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna roll full sound, do the roll up and then go to bed.
We're not live
You're not
yet.
live.
We're not gonna go, we're gonna go live first. So we do that.
Now we're live. Well, hold on.
I think we're good.
Hold on, it's blinking. We're not good until it stops blinking and goes solid. Yeah, it's hit OK and hit live again. It's fine, it does it the first time usually. If it's problematic, I'll come fix it. Man, today, tech today. Jesus Christ. Keep the sound down. Keep us on the stream rate.
Do we have sound? All right. Happy Friday, everyone. It is Gateway Office Hours. We are deep into our episodes now, episode 20, and we are here with Kieran Ringenberg and my partner, Carter Laren.
/IT guy.
/IT guy. Sorry we're a few minutes late. We're just getting rolling. It's Friday. We haven't had our yerba mate. We're a little cranky. But there's been a lot happening lately. Well, it's been a little while since Prop 64 passed, but we're starting to get a lot of questions.
Yeah, well, let's first do like how to follow. Like you can follow us on Facebook. You can. What's the button above?
The follow?
The follow button tells you
I
when
think
we're
it's
live.
up there. Yeah.
Okay.
There's the follow button. You can reach out to us on Twitter, Instagram at GTWI Inc., or you can use the hashtag GatewayOH. You can also email us, reach us, call us, stop by, knock on the door, whatever you want.
Wait, and also you're not going to say this about yourself, so I have to say it.
Okay.
Ben speaking at the World's Fair. When is this?
It's in January.
I saw it online, so it must be true.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, no, they posted a thing. Your picture's up there, like the future of cannabis with Ben Larson.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I better write a talk. Yeah, just kidding.
So,
kind of.
congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I didn't even know. You know.
So, yeah.
Social media tip: let the speaker know.
Sorry.
No, thank you.
Yeah. So
Other
that's
things
good.
in the news too. Lately.
Yeah. So let's introduce Kieran.
Yes.
See, because he's sitting here awkwardly.
But he looks so good. He doesn't even need to say anything.
Hey.
Kieran from Ringenberg Law, worked out of Gateway Works for a little bit, but I think you've graduated.
That's true.
At
Under
this
the
point.
pseudonym California Legalized, right?
Right. That's my website, Twitter handle. That's right.
Okay.
So if you need, if you want to bug a lawyer for free questions, well, you'll get some answers today, but
And
bug
you'll-
them on Twitter.
And they'll be worth exactly what you pay for 'em.
Yeah, I love that you're the lawyer who, when we said, like, do you want to go live on air and ask questions about legality, you're like, yeah, what could go wrong? That's great, yeah. So-
Live questions
Yeah.
on legalness. Yes.
Go ahead. I was going to talk about. I feel like we should do a fake news segment. I call it fake news, which is maybe not accurate, but
Fake news with yeah.
so
Are
we went and
gonna fall into
collected.
that?
We were collecting this week a bunch of questions from founders for you, which I have some listed here. But while we were doing that, an interesting article came out about the DEA. I guess on December 14th, they published a final rule regarding the establishment of a new drug code for marijuana extract, and the community promptly freaked out, and Leafly and probably other outlets started talking about how this is horrible and CBD laws are massively changing, and everyone freaked out. And I won't say what the truth is. Can you tell us, from a legal perspective, what this means?
Sure. So the DEA announced that they're creating a separate code for categorizing extracts from marijuana, separate from the plant itself. And that by itself doesn't really mean anything. It's just a tracking mechanism. There was some language in the DEA's announcement that people are a little concerned about, where they effectively said quite clearly that in their view, CBD oil is covered by the Controlled Substance Act, making it federally illegal. And I think that's the part that's really got people worked up. There is, if you look online, there's a pretty strong trade of CBD oil across state lines openly. I think the DEA is trying to stake out the position that, generally speaking, that's not legal under federal law. And I will say, generally speaking, it is accurate that anything derived from the marijuana plant at all is going to be covered by the Controlled Substances Act, and that means it's potentially a crime to distribute it, especially across state lines, although even in-state is true. There are a few exceptions, and that's really where people are focused. So you can sell a product that's made from hemp seed that's grown overseas. You can sell a product that's made from stalks overseas, and then there's an exception in the 2014 Farm Bill for hemp, and that's really where people have been focusing in lately. And under that program, if you have a state-authorized, state-run pilot or research program, you can grow hemp, meaning marijuana that doesn't exceed 0.3% THC, and you can actually sell that across state lines consistent with federal law. The state law is going to vary, but you can do that across state line. And in fact, in 2016, they added a provision that says the federal government, any branch of the federal government, is prohibited from spending money to prosecute someone who's selling products or acting in compliance with this Farm Bill. So the issue with that is a lot of the CBD oil that's sold in the U.S. probably did not actually have its source in hemp that was grown in one of these state-authorized pilot programs. But they are out there. Kentucky probably has the largest and most known. So certainly my view that if you got licensed hemp grown in Kentucky that met all the federal requirements, you would be authorized under federal law to derive a product from that and sell it anywhere around the country. And I don't think anything the DEA said in their announcement really changes any of that.
So that was going to be my next question. Is this different from is this like new information, or is what's the?
I think there was a belief in the industry by some people who weren't paying close attention that if anything is below 0.3% THC, it's necessarily legal. And that's just not correct.
It's never
certainly
been
that's
true.
not right. And certainly not the view of the United States government. Some creative lawyers might be able to come up with a defense that says that that's the case. Certainly the DEA doesn't believe that. That's not the position of the United States Department of Justice. And so if you were selling CBD oil across state lines does not derive from this hemp grown in one of these state pilot programs, you're definitely at risk for federal prosecution and probably state prosecution in whatever state you're in, depending on what the state laws are.
Right. But that's the same as it was last week.
Absolutely. It's just the DEA saying, hey, guys, we want to be really clear about this. But it's not a change.
Right.
It's just clarity. I think it's maybe a wake-up call for some people who weren't focused in, or maybe who are being willfully blind to
Who didn't
the
talk to
reality.
lawyers about what they were doing before they did it, basically.
Correct. Or maybe didn't talk to the right lawyers.
Fair. That's a very subtle plug.
Well, I mean, I've seen some
absolutely,
advice from lawyers that I don't agree with on this very point. So,
Yeah, okay.
Doesn't mean everyone's wrong, but that there's some people out there who have taken a more aggressive position about what's allowed. And hey, maybe they can defend that, but certainly it's at the very best, it's a risky area.
Yeah, fair. And not to tax your knowledge of how the federal government works, but what is the DEA actually allowed to do with respect to declaring different substances,
Well, so there's you may approach the edge of my knowledge, but so there is the text of the Controlled Substances Act is passed by Congress, and so that has, for example, a definition of marijuana, and it includes in the definition of marijuana as a controlled substance everything derived from the plant with some specified exceptions. The specified exceptions being mature stalks and material derived from the stalks, and seeds that can't be germinated, sterilized seeds, and material derived from the seeds. And what the DEA is authorized to do is to interpret what Congress means as a regulatory agency. So they get some deference by the courts when they announce what the words mean. But there's a range of acceptable interpretations. It still has to be an interpretation of the words Congress has used. So they have limited authority to kind of clarify something if what Congress has written is ambiguous, is probably the best way to put it.
Okay, I think that's helpful. I'm not intelligent enough to tax your knowledge of that anymore, so you can rest assured we can move on. So
I think you have successfully passed the test. We can now move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
I would love to just have you briefly tell us, what is California legalized? What brought you into the cannabis industry? Just give us the Kieran background and why we're sitting here.
So I practiced for 15 years at large commercial law firms doing commercial litigation, mostly for very large companies, and that was rewarding and challenging. But I was looking for something different. I spent a couple of months last year in trial away from my kids. I have 2 school-age kids, and it's like, I don't want to spend 2 months only seeing my kids through a Facebook camera. So I was looking for something that would allow me to achieve a little better balance. And I also wanted to do something that was a little more aligned with my view of the public interest. So I saw the cannabis industry. There's very interesting problems to solve. It's still at a more human level, which means the commercial interests that are involved are still centered around people, not large organizations that really are much bigger than an individual person or group of people. And I really believe that if we're going to defeat the pernicious drug war, we need to do a great job at implementing legalization in California. If we do a good job of this, if we produce regulations that the industry can comply with, that make sense, that protect the legitimate interests that I think the voters had in mind when they passed Prop 64, I think we can be a model for legalization and push that in other states and around the world. If we screw this up, if the industry fights back against all regulations, if they refuse to come into line and come into the light, then I think we could set the movement back. And so which way is it going to go? And I think I wanted to play a role in moving that forward to help move the country and the nation away from the drug war model, which is so damaging for so many reasons.
Yeah, and I think everyone's in agreement on that. At least
Everyone who's gonna watch this show.
The 5 or 6 people who watch this show
Exactly.
are totally in agreement with you on that. So you're really putting there's a lot of pressure on California. You're really saying that people are looking to California, and if we fuck it up, we could actually damage the industry pretty severely.
Oh, absolutely. We're so much bigger than any of the other states that have legalized to date, and our market is many multiples this time of all the other markets combined that have gone. So we're really going to be it. And then there's a certain cultural relevancy to California. And the other thing is, California has had a large, sophisticated, a very lucrative medical industry for the past 10 years, or since Prop 215, 20 years ago, and it's largely unregulated. And as a result of that, there's been a lot of innovation. There's also been some bad actors who have been living in the gray areas, in the shadows.
Right.
And so we need to get a handle on that. It's time to move the industry into the light. I know some people don't agree with that. Some people would prefer to stay in this kind of unregulated market, but that's just not realistic, especially if you look to what's happening at the federal level. We need We need state regulations. We need to be able to go to the federal government and say, we have our house in order. It's time to move this forward into it, to make it a real industry.
Do you think the federal government will turn to states like California and Colorado to see how they regulated and controlled marijuana for them to institute some sort of structure, or do you think it'll just end up being kind of descheduled, free-for-all, whatever?
I think it's too early to tell. I do think there's a political battle to get legalization, and it's going to be a long fight at the federal level. It's going to be a long fight, and it's a political fight. And so if opponents of legalization can point to California and say, look what they did and how bad it screwed up, and look at all these problems, look at driving impaired, look at sales to kids, look at use among teenagers. If they can point to those things, look at these people overdosing on edibles that were poorly labeled. If they can point to these things, then those are going to be arguments they can use to defeat or at least delay legalization at the federal level and steps towards that. So I think that's the most important part. When in 3 or 4 or 5 years from now, when there's a serious conversation about what legalization at the federal level looks like, I think hopefully if we do a good job, they will look to our system. But I think it's more likely that essentially it's going to be a federal hands-off system, and it's going to be left to the states. And the only thing the federal government's going to do is, hopefully, is to enforce people who are taking material cross-border that's not in compliance with the local state law, because that's kind of a unique federal function.
Is that in any way similar to alcohol?
I honestly am not that familiar with the federal alcohol system. I do know it's primarily driven by the states, and there's some federal oversight, but I honestly don't know the details.
Well, but it's not DEA, right? It's ATF, so
correct.
It could be ATF MMJ.
Right. Absolutely. And, there's a lot of options there. And we have a lot of experimenting and learning to do, I think, before we're really ready to have a conversation about what that ought to look like. Because I don't think we really know. Colorado and Washington have learned so much. Oregon is moving forward and learning a lot from their experiences, and we're moving forward learning from all theirs. And I think, and by the time California goes through this process in a much larger, more sophisticated, with a much larger, more sophisticated industry to start with, I think we'll know a lot more.
Cool.
And wait till we get to a state like New York. Holy cow.
Yeah. All right, well, let's jump into some founder questions, which I've conveniently printed out here. Kind of still on the topic of Prop 64, I think we had basically 3 or 4 different questions that all were kind of similarly themed, which was basically a request for you to talk about how Prop 64 affects the legal ability to kind of market cannabis through events. Like, can you legally give it away to people that are over 21? Can non-dispensary stores host cannabis sampling events, right? Can you have a foodie night at a farmer's market and give out free samples? Like, what can you do now?
And just to provide some context, we have a couple of edibles companies that are currently launching that are in the program. Harvest over in San Francisco does these farmer markets essentially at their dispensary, which is a little bit more controlled, but they're thinking like, can we do other creative things like at a coffee shop that
right.
that is complementary to their product.
Sure.
Yeah.
So right now, the only thing that Prop 64 really makes legal is personal, non-commercial cultivation and possession. So, you can have up to an ounce. Essentially, you can have 6 plants and whatever you grow in those 6 plants individually. And you're allowed to use that, possess it, transport it, and even give it away to your friends, assuming they're 21 or over. But that's it. There's no commercial activity on non-medical side that's currently authorized. So I certainly wouldn't advise anyone to engage in any commercial operations where they're giving cannabis to anyone that's other than outside a approved medical context. Now, once you get into 2018, someone has a retail license, then there's going to be allowances, and then you'll be able to have commercial retail opportunities, but not yet. On the medical side, those events do happen. I don't know the particular companies, but presumably they're properly organized, that everyone they're giving cannabis to is a member of their collective and understands that the collective or cooperative nature of the arrangement, where they're just paying money for the expenses of the organization to grow and manufacture the product for them, which is legal under state law. I think the other thing I would add is every local jurisdiction has their own rules, and so I don't know how California or how San Francisco law would apply to a farmer's market, just to be an example, but every place is going to have restrictions, and most places have very tight restrictions on retail sales or retail distribution. And so that'd be something to look out for. San Francisco has been very progressive, as has Oakland, but still, nonetheless, anything where you're taking the product and you're giving it to an end consumer is going to be strictly limited. And I would be skeptical that any event in a retail space other than a licensed dispensary where you're distributing product is going to be allowed by many many local governments.
Okay, so for now, at least for the next year, you're stick to dispensaries.
Yep.
Work with their patients, and give your free samples away there.
That's exactly right. I mean, I think in that context, you know that everyone there's a patient. The dispensary, you can have the right dispensary between the edibles company and the dispensary to make sure everyone's part of the same collective, and then you're compliant with the local rules because the dispensary presumably has a license and is allowed to distribute its product. So, I think that's a great model where you have, a manufacturer come into a dispensary and really are showing the patients the products they have. It's great marketing, and there's really I can't think of any reason why giving it away in that context would be inappropriate. There was actually a bill before the state legislature. It just got put in a few days ago that has a lot of tweaks in Prop 64 and the medical requirements, and actually they included prohibition in that bill against giveaways in medical cannabis as promotional actions, which I kind of was surprised. I don't know if that'll be adopted, if the law will eventually if the bill will make it into law, but that's out there for people to keep an eye on.
Interesting. And so it sounds like if you're, NBCs still need to be signing people up for their collective and operating the same way they were 2 months ago.
If you're engaged in commercial transactions, absolutely.
Okay.
If you're a backyard grower who wants to give less than an ounce to your friend, that's totally okay. Just don't take money for it.
Yeah. Is there? I mean, say what you're comfortable with. Is there a gray area where it's like, yeah, I didn't grow it, but I have this cannabis product and I would just want to give it to a friend. Maybe I got a dispensary, maybe I made it.
So right now, other than growing it yourself, there's two ways to get cannabis in California. You can buy it illegally on the black market, or you can buy it from a properly operating medical cannabis operation. Any medical cannabis operation that has their shipment order is going to require you to agree that you're never going to sell your product to anyone who's not a member of the collective. And so that means in order for you to do what you just said, you'd probably have to, violate the terms of your agreement with the collective. And that's important because the reason the collective requires that is because they're immune from prosecution under certain state laws only if they follow the Attorney General's guidelines, which require you to limit distribution of your product to people who are in the collective.
Now, you're using the word sale here. I just want to be crystal clear.
Yeah.
Ben can't go to Magnolia, our favorite dispensary, and buy an edible and come back and give it to someone. You could give it to me because I'm a member of Magnolia, but you can give it to someone else who's not a member of Magnolia.
Correct. Now I'm a member of Magnolia. I don't remember the exact terms of their collective agreement, but I'm confident because they're a well-run shop that their collective agreement requires you to agree not to give their product to anyone who's not a member of the collective.
Okay.
All right.
That makes it very clear.
Yeah. I just learned something new.
So cut it out. No.
Yeah, I know, right?
Is it the case that those rules are always followed? No, it is not.
Right.
But that's what the rules require. And that's the reason, is because no one wants Magnolia to be prosecuted if they found out that someone was buying cannabis from Magnolia and distributing it to people who weren't qualified patients and who hadn't agreed to the same requirements.
That makes sense. All right. So this next question is... seems rather complex, actually, and specific. Can a non-FDIC, I assume they mean a non-FDIC insured third party, facilitate a financial transaction between two cannabis entities legally?
So if what we're talking about is the third party taking money, as acting as a financial intermediary between two cannabis companies, possibly you'd have to be extremely careful. Certainly not, that is not legal across the board. And there's money laundering issues, there's issues with compliance of the collective guidelines from the Attorney General. And so it's possible that could be set up appropriately. And for example, many dispensaries take ATM cards.
Right.
So there's a bank
They have
involved there.
ATMs.
Right. And so there's someone is, presumably they've got it papered over correctly and they're following the rules. That happens, but it's also possible to do that incorrectly and wind yourself in a heap of trouble. So if you're thinking about having any financial transactions, being involved in any financial transactions between cannabis companies, you really need to pay very close attention.
So, just as an example, like if I had a business and I rented out tables to licensed dispensaries, and they paid me a flat fee, and they could do business together, maybe at my event, that might be okay.
Right. I mean, if you're not
But if I'm taking a cut,
Right.
that might be a problem.
Right.
Is that-
Well, I had assumed the question meant I'm a financial middleman between two cannabis companies. So
Right.
growers are going to give me money to give to a distributor. I think if you just make an introduction, like I don't think there's anything
Well,
necessarily.
let's get to the
wrong with
marketplace
that.
question. I'm a
Yeah.
cultivator. Ben's a dispensary or distributor or whatever. Let's say he's a distributor. And I want to sell to Ben, but I do so on your third-party platform that lets me find Ben, and your platform then takes a cut of that sale. That sounds like it might be gray or okay.
I think, so if the payment is made directly from one cannabis company to another cannabis company, if the transaction is consummated from them, and basically all the marketplace does is connect them together, then that eliminates the money laundering issue because you're not touching the money at all.
Even
The
if you're
research
taking a
says it.
fee, maybe.
Right. And
Okay.
then they're going to pay you for a service. The service being introducing the two of them.
Right.
Now that's not there are reasons why that might be problematic. That's probably aiding and abetting, distribution under federal law. So that's federal crime, which, as long as you're in compliance with state law, they're typically not prosecuting right now. So that's helpful. That could change, but that's certainly true. I can't think of any reason under state law why that's necessarily problematic, as long as the service you're providing is consistent with the Attorney General's guidelines on cannabis collectives, and I don't see any reason why it would be.
But if, for example, instead of paying Ben $10,000 and you taking a cut of that, if I paid you $10,000 and said pay Ben the remainder after your cut, now you're in more trouble.
Right, because you're facilitating, you're holding the money between the two cannabis companies, and that puts you in a much more difficult position.
Okay.
Probably be
from
safer to
money
have like
laundering.
a membership fee or something like that. I mean, if you even just completely disambiguated the transaction from the fee itself, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's hard to actually charge a percentage of a transaction fee if you don't touch the money, because you can't guarantee what that transaction was.
They would have to report it to you.
Right, I
You
can
don't
say,
have to report
oh
it.
yes, Ben sold it to me for $1. He's just a very nice guy. Use your 20 cents or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah.
I agree with that. That's going to be hard to do compliance on. I mean, you might find some way where you get third-party verification of the amount or something like that.
Sure.
It's possible. But I do think there's got to be some ways to structure that appropriately. Money laundering is still an issue in this industry.
Yep.
Anytime you're taking money from someone who's involved in cannabis, there's rather complicated money laundering issues, and the chief number one of which is most people are dealing in cash because it's hard to get bank accounts.
Right. Okay. I think that was helpful. I guess a kind of a separate but related question here is, let's say you're doing what we're talking about. You've got a marketplace. Ben and I are transacting on your marketplace. You're not holding the money, so you're at least safe from that perspective. Could the government force you to give access to the data about who the parties are and what their transactions were?
Yes. There's like a million different ways that could happen. There's federal or state criminal investigations. They could issue a subpoena. You could have civil forfeiture proceedings. They could issue a subpoena. It could be an IRS audit that they could issue a process to try to get the data. So if anyone who believes that they'll never have to give over any data because it's in an app is incorrect.
So
Unless you go as big as Apple.
Actually, I was going to bring
is-
Apple up. Right.
Right.
Could you do technical things that would make it clear that they were verified, but you didn't know who they were?
Like blockchain.
And
I mean, look, if you could set up a system where you don't, you don't have the data that they want, and then
Right.
no matter, you can comply with subpoena, but they're not getting what they're after. I think that you could come up with a technical solution to that problem, but I will say, if your business is built around hiding information from the government about cannabis transactions, that's probably not a great business model.
Right. They'll know your name.
Right. Well, and fair point. And the other thing is when we get to the licensing regime in 2018, all the cannabis companies who are operating in the light are going to have to turn over enormous amounts of information about every transaction they do. So they're going to want detailed records about every transaction they did, which means that is the operators are, because they're going to be required to hand that over.
Right.
Anyone who doesn't want to give the information to the government is almost certainly not complying with the law.
Right. There's a reason why. Yeah.
Right. So that probably not a business you would want to be in.
Fair. That was a. Whoop, there goes my mic. That was cool. All right. I think I know the answer to this one, but cannabis IP, does it really exist, and can I truly protect my cannabis IP?
Yes, some is the answer.
Right.
So
and which IP is that?
Right. So so broadly speaking, intellectual property encompasses patents, trademarks, copyrights, and trade secrets, and there's some other small things, but that's the majority of it. So right now at the federal level, you can't get a trademark registered on sale of cannabis. A lot of cannabis companies trademark ancillary products or services. So maybe you sell a T-shirt, maybe you sell something that is related to your product, so you can get some registration on your brand, but you can't get the trademark that cover, for example, sale of flowers.
Right.
So that is true at the state level in California today as well. The exact same thing is true. I will say, actually, AB 64, which just got introduced a couple of days ago, would expressly authorize state trademarks on cannabis products. So that would be a win for brand investors, people who are investing in the brand in California in the cannabis industry. Patents is a little more gray. The reason you can't get a trademark is because you can only get a trademark based on lawful use in commerce, and it's everything in our industry is most of it's illegal under federal law. So that's why you can't get a federal trademark. There's no similar requirement for patents. So patents have been granted and they have been available. That is out there, but I haven't seen a huge amount that are on businesses that touch the plant. I mean, it's out there, but it's not, hasn't been really common. Copyrights, there's no reason why you couldn't copyright software you wrote that relates to cannabis, or news articles about cannabis, because we have a First Amendment. You can pretty much say what you want, and that's wide open, and trade secrets is also wide open. Okay. So that's the state of play.
Okay, I think that's clear. Okay, last question we have here. And actually, I think this is related to the first one, so maybe we don't even have to ask it, but is there still a need to have a medical card, and this is the new part, and for how long? And if they should get still get cards now, do you recommend a state-issued medical card, or is one of the doctor-prescribed ones good enough?
Right. So until dispensaries get licensed at the state level in 2018, the only way to buy cannabis legally is through medical dispensaries, and that's going to require a card at least through 2018. We're going to require a recommendation or a card through 2018. So there's a good reason. There's another reason, which is if you have a state-issued card, you don't have to pay sales tax. If you don't have a state-issued card, even on medical cannabis, you're required to pay sales tax. So that's reason enough to have a state-issued card rather than a rec.
And that will continue beyond 2018.
Right. That's the law until it's changed. I think it definitely could change.
Sure.
But that's the law for now, and until the legislature sees fit to change it. I haven't really heard of any enforcement differences between physician recommendations and state IDs. I would say, generally speaking, you're probably better off with a state card if you're in some rural county where maybe the law enforcement isn't as sophisticated as a police officer in Oakland or Berkeley might be about medical cannabis. If you had a card that's issued by a government authority, you may get a little more respect with that than with a note from Ease or something.
Right. Some collective the officers never heard of.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, but legally speaking, if you have a valid physician's recommendation, you're entitled to have your product within appropriate guidelines. So it shouldn't matter, but it might make your life easier if you had a card, and the sales tax is reason enough to do it.
Where does one go getting a state card?
Every county has a program to issue county cards, so that's how it works.
Okay.
Alameda County, if you're a resident of Alameda County, there's this county office that'll do it for you.
Interesting. Okay.
I think they charge $35 or something like that.
And it's still on like an annual basis, similar to the doctor recommendation.
I think that's right. I think it may be through whatever the physician recommendation is. So
Mhm.
the expiration date on the card is going to be whatever your physician whenever your physician recommendation
sense.
requires. I think it's yearly. So if you get your rec and then go right to the office, you'd have a year on the card.
I got you.
I
Got it.
believe.
Got it. Well, thanks for coming in and chatting with us about this stuff. Do you have I don't know, anything to plug? You've got you can go to ringenberglaw.com. What was your Twitter handle again?
At Cali Legalized.
Cali Legalized.
And I maintain a kind of news and information website called California Legalized. So that's where most of the cannabis stuff is, and you can find out what's happening around the state.
Awesome.
And if you send your questions into us, we'll just pass them on to you, and I'm sure you'd be happy to field the hundreds of them that are going to roll in.
Yes, all for free, because that's what lawyers love to do.
Yes.
Is take lots of legal risk for free by answering questions.
All I have to sell is my time, so I'd love to give it away.
Well, we really appreciate your time today. Thank you for coming in, and I'm sure we'll chat some more
Very good.
soon.
Yeah.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Karen. See you guys next week. All right.
Sound is low, there's still some visual.
All right. Thanks. That was cool.
That's great. That's fine. Thanks.
I appreciate it. Yeah. I think it was.
Yeah, I was going to say, do you think your folks get what you need?
Yeah.
Get what they need?